Howdy, folks. This is George Finney, and I am here to help you be more well aware when it comes to cybersecurity. This is the eighth of the nine cybersecurity habits, mirroring, and the theme for today is looking at your reflection. That's really the value of mirroring when it comes to security. We talk a lot about mirroring in leadership development kind of courses. Just to improve yourself overall, and you can use the same technique when it comes to cybersecurity. And so kind of to start the conversation off, we always like to talk about an example, an exemplar of who we feel like kind of exemplifies the habit. And we, so we're going to start talking today about Edward R. Murrow. So this story didn't actually make it into the book, but Edward R. Murrow, I think, is one of the most inspiring figures of the 20th century. About 70 years ago, so Edward R. Murrow was a journalist, and he really performed one of the most important acts of journalism in American television history. So the TVs were still relatively new. Murrow had gotten his start in World War II. And he was really the country's most highly respected journalist in the 1940s and 50s. He had a whole team of other journalists kind of that worked around him. They called them the Murrow Boys. But one of the things that was happening in the 1950s is the McCarthyism. And so what Murrow did, he dedicated an entire episode of his show on CBS to the words and the actions of Joseph McCarthy, who was a senator at the time. And if you don't recall, McCarthy was famous for having this list of who he thought were communists working in the government and in business, right? And there were lots of people who lost their jobs, who were blackballed because of this threat that maybe they were communists, when in fact they weren't. There was no evidence to support that. And this supposed list of communists that McCarthy held up in front of Congress was totally fabricated. And Murrow was really the one person in the country that was trusted enough to call McCarthy out. So he did this on live television, prime time on his news show, and using McCarthy's own statements. Murrow painted this picture of a man, McCarthy, whose recklessness with the truth and his ugly attacks on his critics had contributed to this climate of fear and repression in American life after World War II. And so at the end of the show, Murrow turned to the camera and delivered this long monologue, which is incredible. And part of it, I'll quote it here. There is no time for men who oppose Senator McCarthy's methods to keep silent, or for those who approve. We can deny our heritage and our history, but we cannot escape responsibility for the result. There is no way for a citizen of a republic to abdicate his responsibilities. As a nation, we have come into our full inheritance at a tender age. We proclaim ourselves, as indeed we are, the defenders of freedom wherever it continues to exist in the world. But we cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. And so this really strikes deep into the heart of who we are as a democracy. And Edward R. Murrow, he built this reputation. He built a community, right? And so talking about the other cybersecurity habits, he lived this. And so much so that Murrow has kind of become, you might have heard of like the Pulitzer Prize, right? And that's something that all reporters aspire to win, hopefully one day. But they actually made a prize called the Edward R. Murrow Award for visual journalism, for TV news. And so he really is this figure that really held a mirror up essentially to both McCarthy as well as to the country. And I think there's this issue of trust in our country today that there isn't that figure that all people can see and believe in and trust. And I think it's a challenge, but really what the freedom of the press does, the function in our democracy is to hold that mirror up. And so I actually remember hearing a quote from Jeffrey Smith, who was the former general counsel to the CIA. And he actually said that many of the discussions that happened within the CIA about ethics and whether they were going to do the right thing or not often really came about only as a result of the free press's ability to question their actions. If we suppress the free press, we lose that mirror. We lose the ability to get better. And ultimately, whether it's the CIA or whether it's defeating McCarthyism, this made us more secure as a country, not less secure. And we should embrace mirroring as a habit if we want to be better people and if we want to be better companies. And as it turns out, this habit of mirroring, has been true for at least 2,400 years. So this is a quote from Aristotle. Aristotle is widely regarded as one of the greatest philosophers who's ever lived. And his quote, is cuts to the heart, right? And he starts talking about it. It's actually in one of his works about friendship. But he says friends hold a mirror up to each other, and through that mirror, that's how we improve. But by seeing ourselves through another person's eyes, and in a way, this is kind of hardwired into our brains. So I'm a pretty big Dallas Cowboys fan. So if you're a Cowboys fan like me, you probably remember a few months ago when Dak Prescott was injured, right? And if you were watching that and you saw what happened to his leg, when I watched it, I could feel my own, bones breaking, right? It's a horrific injury. And there's good reason for that. It's because there's something in our brains that they're called mirror neurons. But that's what really enables us to feel what other people are feeling when you see a skateboarder fall down and hurt himself, right? You physically have a reaction to that. And so mirror neurons were discovered by this scientist called Giacomo Rizzolatti in the 1990s. He was a professor of neuroscience, and he was studying the brains of macaque monkeys. I'm sorry, I'll go back. So he had wired up this monkey's head with these microelectrodes to kind of watch its brain while it was doing things like eating peanuts. And so you can kind of imagine, the monkey's kind of strapped into this high chair looking device. And it's got kind of shaved head. So all the scientific equipment could be attached to it. And as you can imagine, it's a real pain to get the monkey attached and everything. It's strapped down. And of course, lunchtime rolls around, and they're not going to unstrap the monkey and before they go to lunch. They just kind of left it there, and they left a student worker in charge of what making sure the monkey didn't escape or anything while they were at lunch. But the student worker, of course, brought his own lunch, and he actually brought some ice cream. And so as he ate the ice cream, the same signals. He heard this kind of noise. Of course, the monkey's still strapped into the brain sensing device, the EEG, and the same pings were happening when the monkey was eating. Happened when the monkey was watching the student worker eat, and so that they eventually wrote papers on this, and it turns out that that there is a measurable thing called mirror neurons, and the same study obviously has been done since then in humans, and we found that mirror neurons play a role in learning. but not just learning. They also appear to help you understand the intent of the other person that you're interacting with. So, scientists have done studies. We can actually tell the difference when we just see a picture of someone holding a coffee cup. We can tell the difference between someone who's holding it to clean it or who's about to clean it versus someone holding the same coffee mug in almost the exact same position when they're about to take a drink. That's how powerful mirror neurons are. And so Dr. Rizzolatti was quoted in the New York Times in 2006. He said, we're exquisitely social creatures. Our survival depends on understanding the actions and intentions and emotions of others. And that's really what mirror neurons do for us. And so the last cybersecurity habit we talked about, I know it's been a few weeks, but that habit was community, right? We come together as a community for mutual protection. And I think from a cybersecurity perspective, once we start coming together, that's really powerful. But we also, we'll tend to kind of leak information sometimes, and we need to be intentional about that. And mirroring helps us do that. We can do things like Googling our own name, or we can look at, our social media profiles as though we were a member of the general public, and we can see what it is that we're seeing. But you can do these things also in person to look at other people. And I think the takeaway here, from mirror neurons or from Aristotle, is that we're literally hardwired for empathy. Our brains are wired for this. And so going back to the chapter on culture, right? When we say that culture eats cybersecurity for breakfast, or when we say that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? The thing that that Peter Drucker calls out is that, the thing to overcome, those challenges is having empathy for our people. Once you have empathy and you can show that, then those strategies, those efforts that we make towards cybersecurity start to get traction. And so we're hardwired for empathy, but we also are hardwired for something else. We're hardwired to have blind spots. And so I often do this experiment when I'm in on stage in a crowd. You can kind of do it just now, but there's a blind spot built into your eyes themselves. So you can kind of see at the bottom where your optic nerve attaches to your eyeball. Where the retina is, there are no receptors where the optic nerve attaches. That means you're not receiving any information. And so the experiment, if you close one eye, if you close your left eye and with your right eye, you kind of look over towards your nose, about 20 degrees, following the same kind of line where the crook of your nose starts, that will align your blind spot to straight in front of you. So if I were standing straight in front of you in a large audience, and you were looking kind of at the same level of my head would actually disappear. And what your brain does is it's really good about filling in missing details. So whatever was behind or around my head, your brain starts to fill in those textures and those colors, and you don't necessarily know. You don't necessarily notice unless you are trained to look for it that something's missing. The same thing, a similar process happens, if you get migraines, right? You start to lose peripheral vision. You can start to kind of lose those sensing, and you don't notice it at first. I do get migraines, and it's you notice something's off, but you can't really put your finger on it until you kind of dig a little deeper into that. Sorry about that. So our minds have evolved to fill in the blind spots, but really the control there, the way to fill in your blind spots is literally to add a different perspective. That's why we have two eyes, so that we can cover up those blind spots, and you can kind of see the angles are complementary, so that you're not reproducing blind spots on the other eye. But really, you need that other perspective to see the whole picture. And really, what our brains are designed to do is to kind of go with as little cognitive load as possible. And what Daniel Kahneman, he's the Nobel Prize winning psychologist who created the entire field of behavioral economics, and he discovered the theory of cognitive bias. He writes essentially, and I think we've talked about this before with one of the other habits, is that our brains are lazy. Our minds tend toward what he calls the least amount of thinking required for any given task. So this results, in what he calls the phenomena of what you see is all there is, right? If I get a little bit of information, I naturally assume that I have all of the information I need to make a decision. If I see something, I naturally assume that that's all there is there, and there's nothing missing from that picture, because that's harder. And really, what mirroring does is it's a phenomenon where we can start to help fill in the gaps. Because our brains have been designed to minimize cognitive load, they don't look for the most complete picture before making a decision. So thinking about what you see is all there is. How do we overcome that? How do we grow and see ourselves from an outside perspective? It's a really interesting challenge, and I think it's one of the most critical challenges to cybersecurity, right? So one of the things we do in cybersecurity is called a penetration test. So we will hire hackers who will come in, and hopefully you've got contractual protections in place to make sure they don't do anything bad. But you bring them in, and they look at your perspective from an outside perspective to find weaknesses. And so it's interesting. This is actually one of the most famous, boringest photographs in history. And so it kind of looks like you're taking a picture of the nighttime sky that isn't quite nighttime yet. Actually, this is a photo from the Voyager 1 mission. This picture is commonly referred to as the pale blue dot. Because it's not taken from a picture on the planet, which you naturally assume because that's where we see most pictures. This is a picture. I think at the time the Voyager was past Mars, heading toward Jupiter, and everything you've ever seen in your entire life, even if you've traveled the entire globe, is in that tiny, tiny white speck in the middle of that hazy, sideways column. And so the Carl Sagan came up with the idea for this picture. They actually had to turn the Voyager, around so that it would look backwards, and typically it was looking forwards. And they wanted this picture because really seeing, how small the world is from a million billion miles away, it changes your perspective, right? And that's what we're trying to do with the mirroring habit. So just like this chapter discusses mirroring to see how others view your social media, NASA used the same picture to shift the perspective of the viewer so that we can see what we all look like as one whole group of people on the planet, instead of different countries or different races or different political parties. And so this is important. If you've read any Tolstoy, he wrote that everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself or herself. Gandhi said a similar thing. He said, if we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. Or if you're Michael Jackson, right, he's got the song, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. So, whether you're Tolstoy or Gandhi, Michael Jackson or NASA, they argue that everyone must change themselves first in order to change the world around them. Really, that's what mirroring is. And so how do you do that? It's a real challenge. So this is a famous psychologist. His name was Carl Rogers. So Rogers was a professor of clinical psychology. He kind of worked with children at the beginning of his career, and I think that shaped the way his view evolved. But his theory on how to be a psychologist really became the default for all psychologists everywhere, and his approach is called the unconditional positive regard. So Carl Rogers' unconditional positive regard, and really this approach requires the therapist to kind of set aside all of their effectively baggage in order to promote their client's growth, right? If you feel like I'm judging you as a therapist, then you're not going to be able to get over that and move on. And the theory is that individuals, the patients themselves, has within them the vast resources for self-understanding, for altering his or her self-concept, attitudes, behaviors, and that these resources can be tapped if and only if a definable climate of facilitative psychological attitudes can be provided, right? And so, the psychologist, the therapist, whoever, has to get out of the patient's way. And I think we've got to do the same thing in cybersecurity, right? We as cybersecurity professionals can't judge the businesses, right? And expect them to grow. We have to mirror them, right? And what mirroring involves in Carl Rogers' estimation is you first have to set aside your own viewpoint. You have to validate the other person's perspective. You've got to examine your own attitudes for conflicting beliefs. You've got to listen for what the other person values, and then ask yourself, what would this other person do? And so, gosh, that's a lot of work, but it's critical work in order to make real change happen. This is really what mirroring is about. And so, there are two aspects to this. You can look for other people and see in them reflected back to you what your viewpoints are, and challenge your own beliefs, because you see maybe there's an incongruity with that, or you can be a mirror for others. And so one popular strategy, you may have heard of something called a bug bounty program. So bug bounties, they're really, in a cybersecurity context, it's really about finding, potential zero-day vulnerabilities or software bugs that could be exploited to harm your users of your software. But the original bug bounty program, the reason that it got the name a bug bounty program wasn't because they were looking for software bugs necessarily. It was because they were giving away a free Volkswagen bug if you found a bug in their software. The company was Hunter and Reddy. They made a virtual real-time operating system, and they believed that their software was secure enough to offer this free Volkswagen as a way of advertising that their software was very secure and reliable. I actually reached out to James Reddy when I was writing the book, and he didn't respond. I was really curious to know whether anybody had ever actually claimed the bug, and didn't get a response back, which is fine. But their VTRX software, it actually powers the Hubble Space Telescope, among other things, right? That's how reliable it is, and that's how critical it is to find the vulnerabilities, right? You can't send something into space that hopefully someone can hack, right? And that's you also want it to be able to last for decades and decades without having a flaw that causes the thing to crash. Rebooting a space telescope is pretty hard. So I think, again, mirroring plays such an important role in cybersecurity that we've got to find a way to incorporate mirroring into all aspects of our use of technology. And again, just to I say it every time, but security is in your DNA, right? We that's who we are. We've evolved as a species to have security written into our DNA. And so how do we do that when it comes to daily life? Well, again, this is the habits recipe portion of the show. You need prompts, you need behaviors, and you need rewards. So again, just to get your brains pumping, here are some sample prompts, right? Maybe before I go to bed, I'll do something. Maybe when I plug my phone in to charge, that will trigger me doing a certain behavior. And so to get your mind going on some sample habits, and think about mirroring. Think about Googling your own name. Think about looking at your social media. If your company hasn't done a tabletop exercise or a pen test, this is a great time to do that. And so here are my sample recipes. So when I get to work, I will Google my name. And by the way, I just don't Google my own name. I will Google my name and my email address. I'll Google my name and SMU. I'll Google my name and my book. And again, that extra level of detail kind of helps filter out, other George Finneys in the world. There's another very famous George Finney who is a pro bodybuilder. So there you go. But it also, again, as people kind of get to know you more, their perspectives and some of those things, like George Finney and Well Aware, add just that extra different perspective. And so when I park my car, maybe I'll reward myself by taking the scenic route to my office and kind of relaxing and getting ready for the day. Or before I go home, I'll make a list of all of the interactions through technology. And I think that's important. Again, going back to mirroring, this is kind of in more detail in the book. But think about how whether those interactions were good or bad. And think about what reflections that has about your company or the way you use technology. And again, seeing those reflections purposefully. Again, there are two aspects of mirroring. There's being a mirror for others, and seeing what others have in terms of how they interact with you as a mirror. So I think you've got to do both, and then make sure you include your rewards. The goal here is to build habits, whatever those habits might be that are important to you in your environment. And with that, the final habit will be next week. The final habit is deception. I think it's kind of the most exciting of the habits in a way, but it's also the most challenging one to incorporate and master successfully. So with that, I will stop the recording